Good evening. Tonight's story is Peter Humbug and the White Cat, translated by Jens Christian Bay. This story appeared in Bay's book Danish Folktales, published in 1899. It's a simple, slightly odd, traditional folktale of the kind common in Northern Europe. So now, let's open our imaginations and begin. In a country far, far away, there once lived a great and powerful king who had 3 sons, all of whom he loved as dearly as a father can love his children. The 2 older ones were very handsome and intelligent, while the youngest was of little account. Peter was his name, and, as a rule, his brothers and comrades made a fool of him whenever they saw their chance. They called him Peter Humbug. The king, however, liked them all equally well, and when he reached old age he did not know how to avoid wronging 2 of them by electing one as the successor to the throne. In those days it was a custom with the kings to extend a heavy iron chain all around the palace in order to prevent the common people from running into the courtyard. The chain, which was now serving that purpose, had become so well worn, however, by rust and wear, that the king thought seriously of having a new one made. As he was a wise man who always knew how to manage his affairs easily and suitably, he thought that here was an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, namely, at one time to decide who would be his successor and to secure a new chain for the palace. Therefore he said to the princes, "Now you must all 3 set out for the purpose of getting a new chain for the palace. A year from today you shall return, and he who brings the longest chain will be my successor to the throne after my death." The 2 oldest boys at once departed. The one secured work with the ablest blacksmith he could find, while the other, who considered himself much more clever than his brother, was engaged by a coppersmith, thinking that copper could be worked more easily than iron. Peter Humbug was for some time uncertain whether he wished to depart or not. He thought that his brothers were more able and skilled than he, but when the king told him to do his best, he trudged away. Of course, he had no idea what to do, or how to make such a chain as his father wished, so he walked straight into the country until he entered a large forest where, at length, he lost his way. Evening and night found him walking amongst the trees. At length he discovered a light shining in the distance, and when he followed the direction towards it, he finally reached a small hut. Having knocked at the door, he heard someone call, "Come in," whereupon he opened it and crossed the threshold. Imagine his surprise when he found no one within except a big white cat seated comfortably in a chair. Supposing that no one but the cat could have responded to his knock, he turned to her, inquiring if he could secure a resting place in the house. The cat told him that he was welcome. "But," she added, "since you come so late, you are no doubt hungry." Peter Humbug replied that there was some truth in that, and the cat now proceeded to tell him where to find what he needed to eat, whereupon Peter did justice to the viands. When the meal was finished, the cat pointed to a bed, telling him that he might go to sleep whenever he desired. Tired as he was, he soon slept soundly. Next morning, the cat expressed her wish to know who he was and where he was going. Peter told all, adding that he had, beforehand, given up the hope of securing such a long chain. In fact, he knew not where to find or how to procure it. "If you will serve me," said the cat, "you shall have nothing to do but wash and comb me 3 times every day. Of course you will receive no wages, and the meals will be exactly like the one which you had last night." "That might be well enough after all," answered Peter. "Time will pass then until the year comes around." He stayed with the white cat, washed and combed her 3 times a day, and passed the rest of his time in the woods. When the year had passed, the cat said, "Now you must return home, Peter. Both of your brothers will do the same." But Peter did not care to do so, since he could carry no chain with him.
"You must do it anyway," said the cat, "and I promise to give you a chain which is better than those of both of your brothers. Carry home the chest which you see standing in the hall, and when your brothers have showed their chains, you must open this chest, which contains a chain longer and better in every respect than all others."
Peter thanked the cat, bid her goodbye, took the chest, and left the little house in the forest. When he reached home, his brothers had already arrived. The king proceeded to ask the oldest to produce his chain. The young man opened a strong coffer and pulled out a heavy iron chain, which he tried in the place reserved for it. It held the exact measure and was in every respect satisfactory. Then the second oldest came with his masterpiece, a copper chain which reached twice round the palace.
"Now, Peter," said the king, addressing his youngest son, "let us see what you have brought."
Opening his chest, the boy drew out a very heavy chain made of pure gold, which held 3 times the right measure. Everyone agreed with the king that Peter had done best of all, because this chain was not only the longest, but also a costly treasure. The 2 older brothers were by no means content with the result of the contest. They had been sure of winning the prize, and considered Peter Humbug a poor fellow to manage a kingdom. So at length they contrived to induce the king to send them away once more, this time for the purpose of getting money. He who returned with the largest amount of money was to inherit the kingdom. The king assented, and the brothers departed, Peter Humbug the last, like the year before. The 2 older brothers considered themselves sure of winning this time, for it takes a clever man to earn much money, and Peter could not at all boast of being clever. The oldest brother became a merchant and gained 100% on all that he sold. The other established himself as a money lender, extorting money from unfortunate people in a sinful manner. Peter was not sure of what he wished to do. As he went along in deep thought, he chanced to find once more the little house in the forest, where he was again received by the white cat. He stayed there all night, and next morning the cat asked him whether he was willing to stay another year on the same conditions as before. He assented, and during the whole year he washed and combed the cat 3 times a day, passing the remainder of his time among the trees. Time passed rapidly, and before Peter knew, the year had passed.
"Now you must return home, Peter," said the cat one day. "Your brothers have gone back already."
Peter objected, as he had no money.
"Take with you the chest which you will find in the hall," said the cat. "It contains money enough."
When Peter arrived, his brothers were there already, and the king now asked them to show how much they had managed to gain. The oldest son had been clever enough to gather his money in copper coin, thinking he would have most, both in regard to weight and to number. He had so much that he covered nearly 1/2 the floor in the largest room with his money. The second oldest son came next. He had silver coin enough to cover the remaining part of the floor. Finally, Peter came in.
"Well, Peter Humbug," cried they, "can you bid higher?"
Peter thought he could not, and he who had the silver money began already to rejoice. Soon, however, Peter had opened his chest and emptied its contents upon the floor. He spread it over the copper and the silver, and when he had finished this work, behold, no copper or silver piece was visible, but the whole floor glittered and sparkled with Peter Humbug's gold.
"Peter is the victor this time as well," declared the king, "and now it is certain that he will inherit the throne."
Peter's 2 brothers were not pleased to hear this. They objected that he was not competent enough for this responsible position, and finally they proposed that their father should allow them to seek a wife. He who returned within 1 year with the prettiest wife should be successor to the throne. Although the king was not altogether pleased with this proposition, mainly for Peter's sake, he assented, especially as Peter himself made no objection. The two brothers thought that this time it was quite impossible for Peter to win. What princess in the world would care to marry a person like Peter Humbug? Peter trudged along, but where should he go to find a pretty wife? He speculated and speculated, hardly knowing whither he was going, until he found himself again at the hut in the forest. Having knocked at the door and heard the cat call, "Come in," he ate and slept, and next morning the animal asked him why he had returned again. Peter told her that he was seeking a wife, but did not know how to find one. When the cat heard the circumstances, she said that he had better stay where he was. Peter did not know whether it would be of any use to him, as he had never seen a single human being around this place, and he must, of course, seek a beautiful princess, or some person of high rank and great beauty. But, as the cat had helped him so well the 2 previous times, he followed her advice, however, and consented to stay on the same conditions as before. One day passed like the other. When the cat was washed and combed, Peter was at liberty to roam about the woods to his heart's content. Time flew so rapidly that he was taken by surprise when one day the cat told him that a year had passed and that he must return home, as both of his brothers were already there, each with his bride. Peter thought there was time enough, as he had not yet found a bride himself. "You have served me faithfully for 3 years," said the cat, "and therefore I am determined to help you this time also. You must promise, however, to do exactly as I tell you." Yes, Peter was ready to do whatever she wished. "Take your knife," pursued the cat, "and cut my head off. As soon as you have done this, strip off my skin." Peter said he could not do this, as she had always treated him so kindly. "You must do it nevertheless," returned the cat, "if you wish matters to end well." Thus Peter was obliged to obey. But as soon as he had cut off her head and begun to skin her, a beautiful princess stood before him with a crown on her hair. She told him how an evil power had doomed her to remain in the shape of a cat until a prince declared himself willing to serve her for 3 years. "And," added she, "as you have done so, I am freed from the witchcraft and ready to return home with you." Peter was, of course, both surprised and pleased to see the beautiful princess appear before him, but he was much more delighted to learn that she was willing to become his wife. Now he must surely win the contest, for a prettier princess he had never seen in all his life. "Let us enter the golden carriage which is waiting in front of the house," said the princess. "During our journey I will tell you more about myself." They entered the vehicle, and while Peter drove the horses, brandishing the whip over the animals to his heart's content, in boundless joy, the princess related her story. "My father was once a great and mighty king, and he lived happily with my mother until she fell sick and died, whereupon my father married a queen who was a widow with 1 daughter. But this stepmother of mine was a witch, and when she realized that I was prettier than her own daughter, she was afraid that I might stand in her way. Therefore, she converted me into the shape of a white cat and forced me to live alone in this large forest until you came and released me. And so I have a 2-fold reason for liking you." Peter looked at the young princess, and, as she smiled sweetly at him, he stopped the horses in the middle of the forest to kiss her. They soon reached the palace. On the front steps the old king and his 2 older sons, with their wives, were standing, anxious to know who could afford to drive in such luxury. When the carriage stopped below the steps, they recognized Peter. He jumped from his seat, helping the princess to alight, and as soon as they had glanced at her, they all admitted that she was the most beautiful. The 2 other princesses were very pretty girls, but their beauty did by no means reach that of Peter Humbug's fair and graceful bride. It was thus decided that Peter should inherit the throne. He did so, in fact, shortly afterwards, when the old king had died, and his marriage with the princess had been celebrated with great splendor. Evidently, he was a much better man than people expected him to be, for he ruled his land wisely and well. He was much beloved by his people. But the two older brothers went away to other countries, and no one ever knew what became of them. The best sentence in this story is, supposing that no one but the cat could have responded to his knock, he turned to her, inquiring if he could secure a resting place in the house. I have noticed that every single Danish story I've read contains some mentions of the qualities of a good king. No matter what the story is actually about, there has to be some little side commentary about the monarchy. I find this story interesting. There are lots of stories of enchanted princesses, of course, but this one has some unique qualities. I really like the image of the white cat living alone in the forest, keeping house and minding her own business, and occasionally handing out chests of treasure. Peter Humbug is another one of those passive heroes who doesn't do much, and he seems to be at the mercy of everyone else in the story. The bit where the cat commands him to cut her head off and skin her body is unexpectedly dark and grim in a story that is so otherwise kind of light and casual. Also, this does seem like a pretty ineffectual curse. I personally know lots of people who would be perfectly happy to groom a cat 3 times a day in return for room and board and time to wander around in the forest. It sounds lovely, actually, even without chests of treasure. Jens Christian Bay has appeared on the channel before, and an overview of his biography is in the closing comments of that video. The story is Hans Humbug, I think, which I will link in the description below. For that reason, I thought I would share with you a quote from him instead. Over his lifetime, Bay accumulated a remarkable rare book collection focused on literature from the early American West. This collection truly became his life's work, and as he aged, he worried what would become of it. His children weren't interested in it, and he feared the collection would be scattered and his books would be mistreated. Seriously, he wanted wood bookends with felt bases and claimed that, quote, steel shelves are good only for the ordinary riffraff of books, end quote. Eventually, he sold his entire collection to the State Historical Society of Missouri, who curated it under his direction from 1942 until his death in 1962. In 1942, he gave a speech at the annual meeting of this historical society, and I think that this excerpt is just lovely. He says that his books are, quote, a library, not a chance aggregation, because it was formed around the idea that our pioneer spirit, our Western life, is worth preserving in record and by way of emulation. In fact, this spirit will not be forgotten or overlooked. It still unites us. It is still true that this region, the middle border, is our country's heart, and that heart remains sound, whatever comes, whatever passes. End quote. He really was an incredible character. If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you get to hear me make a little confession. This week's confession is about death and possessions. It is absolutely true that as you get older, you start to kind of wonder what's going to happen to your stuff, especially if it's stuff you care about. And there can be a kind of hopelessness in the idea that nobody's going to care about it or care for it the way you will. We can't all be like Bay here, continuing to control his book collection after he sold it and even after his death. Unless you believe in ghosts, I suppose. Will I haunt my kitchen table then, making spooky noises at people who don't use a coaster? What a dreadful version of the afterlife. On the other hand, the bonus is that eventually you might buy something and it's the last one you'll ever have to buy. How many more pairs of boots will I wear out, really? How many appliances? How many hand towels? It all ends eventually, and if you're lucky, you get to see it coming. You don't have to go on buying things forever. Okay, that's a bit of a dark turn. If you like dark turns, you should subscribe to this channel. Every week I bring you strange old stories from around the world, and most of them do not end up the way that you would expect. Please like and share this video. Click all the things that make YouTube happy, and I will see you next week.